watching NRA TV with Bill Whittle.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Hot Mike Show live from Los Angeles, California. Hot Mike can't be here today. He's too sexy for his shirt, apparently. So can't very well have him going on half naked. We expect him back tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking about this entire idea of running with the herd, and that would be on the left. They don't like to be considered herd animals like that, but it pretty much is true because everything they believe is pretty much uniformly held, uniformly stated. There's very little disagreement. And where there is disagreement, the consequences for a person on the left can be severe. Let's just tee this whole thing off by listening to the outrageous, unbelievable, fascist Nazi remarks made by ultra-right-wing lunatic and wingnut Matthew McConaughey. He got into some trouble for saying something as audacious as this.
So every single American actor or arty type who comes over to London dumps on Trump. You all completely hate him. Do you think it's time that maybe Hollywood and the cultural elite of America gave this guy a break?
Well, they don't have a choice now. He's our president. And it's very dynamic and as divisive of an inauguration in time that we've ever had. At the same time, it's time for us to embrace, shake hands with this fact, and be constructive with him over the next 4 years. So anyone, even those who most strongly may disagree with his principles or things he's said and done, which is another thing. We'll see what he does compared to what he had said. No matter how much you even disagreed along the way, it's time to think about how constructive can you be, because he's our president for the next 4 years, at least, President of the United States.
That's outrageous. How can you say that, Matthew McConaughey? Don't you realize that by saying that he's the elected president of the United States for the next 4 years and maybe we ought to just sit back and see what happens, don't you realize that you're basically promoting the genocide of every single person of color in the country? How can you possibly be so cruel? One person who knows an awful lot about what's going on out here in Los Angeles is my friend Jeremy Boring. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Forward Publishing, and he's also a big part of the team over at Daily Wire. Jeremy and I are both out here live in Los Angeles. His office is just about a mile to the east of me, which is why it's already dark where he is.
That's right.
We're still in the sunlight out here, just a little further west. Jeremy, it's good to see you, pal. How are you?
Yeah, you stole my opening line.
Oh well, that's what I do. So listen, we're talking today about this whole idea of not only how the right is demonized, but how anybody who strays off of the progressive plantation is beaten severely. Recently, there was a bit of a dust-up when ultra-conservative right-wing gun nut Bret Easton Ellis, who is basically a New York City writer who wrote American Psycho and who's, of course, a gigantic liberal. He made some outrageous, unbelievable, almost mind-numbingly conservative right-wing Nazi remarks. So let's play the first one, Jeremy, and then we'll go to the second one. Then we'll talk about it. So here's what got Bret into some hot water, starting off.
Well, look, he was elected. I mean, that's what you have to look at, the fact that he was elected. It wasn't as if there was, some kind of coup that happened. America elected him to be president. What are we going to do? I mean, you've got to give him a chance and let this thing play out for a bit and see what happens. And I do think there's a lot of mischaracterization and demonizing in the press that's been going on for the last couple of years. For Hillary, certainly. For Hillary Clinton, there was. And for Donald Trump, there was. And I think we're in a very emotional moment. You can see it in social media. People overreact and catastrophize everything. And it sells. People then click to it, and they react to it. In reality, is there a tidal wave of, of fascism washing across the shores? I'm not sure. Maybe a puddle or two.
Wow, dude. Doesn't get much more radical than that, does it? No wonder he had to be beaten into silence on social media. Jeremy, he had the audacity to say that Donald Trump was... Yeah, me too, and triggered as well. Donald Trump was elected, that there was no coup, that this wave of fascism sweeping the country probably doesn't exist, may even be just a little puddle, and so on. Social media just utterly destroyed the guy for this. But you can't have anybody destroying the narrative, right? And the narrative right now is that Donald Trump is illegitimate. We can't talk about the fact that he won the election.
Yeah, that's right. Well, with the help of the media, the left gets to turn their talking points into functional reality, right? So basically, the Republicans in the Senate couldn't get their act together on health care because of a Democrat talking point about 20 million people losing their health coverage, when the reality is those 20 million people would be electing not to purchase health insurance. But it's a good gig if you can get the entire echo chamber of the American cultural machine behind you.
Well, that's let's just go back and pick up part 2 on Bret Easton Ellis, because after some of this backlash, again he retreated to the Joseph Goebbels-esque kind of hate-filled vitriol that you're about to hear right here.
Some of us who did not vote for Trump and who located exactly who he was decades ago, I wrote about this in American Psycho, some of us have been wondering, resist what exactly? And who is telling us to resist whatever? The people who voted for the candidate who lost? I'm supposed to listen to them? Is this a joke? What am I supposed to be resisting? Well, I'm certainly resisting the childish meltdowns I've been witnessing at dinners and on social media and on late-night TV, and too many times in my own home in the aftermath of Donald Trump's victory last November. And this disruption of the status quo, of the establishment, this dismantling of the political narrative everyone had been so used to and who expected the Obama era to effortlessly merge in with another Clinton in the White House, which alarmingly suggested, I thought, a movement backward and not forward. And when this didn't happen, it was just too much for some people. And I will resist using the term snowflake. Let's face it, it has been overused. And all the disappointment and fear and horror and rage has not subsided for some people, and not just members of Generation Wuss, but actual adults, grown-ups, people in their 40s and 50s and 60s, unhinged, and acting like big disappointed babies that their team didn't win.
Unhinged and acting like big disappointed babies that their team didn't win. Now, that actually sounded extremely reasonable to me. Didn't sound like that was an arch-conservative speaking. That just sounded like an adult taking a look at the situation the way that adults do. But,
he includes
Jeremy
himself,
is...
right? He says, even in my own home.
Of course,
some of this overreaction has been taking
exactly.
place.
Now, you and I both spent a fair amount of time in meetings for organizations that maybe not top secret, but certainly not widely broadcast. But we know that that if you're a member of show business out here in Hollywood, you get to experience the entire spectrum of political thought, from far left on one hand to extreme left on the other. And when people get off the plantation and start saying things like, well, he was elected, or maybe we should give him a moment, or, I don't see these death camps people are talking about. It's terrifying to the left to have somebody speak so reasonably. Can you give us some insight onto why that may be?
Well, I think that the left established themselves in Hollywood and the media throughout the 20th century, and it's because they were a little bit more shrewd about the power, the persuasive power of wielding popular culture. But the problem that they find themselves with now is that they've had such an unchecked stranglehold on it for so long. There's the classic story about the emperor's new clothes, right? And the emperor's walking through naked, and until someone points out the fact, everyone basically goes along with it. But I actually think that story misses part of the deeper psychology, which is that if you're surrounded by people all saying that the emperor is clothed when he isn't, eventually you come to believe that the emperor is clothed. You don't feel liberated by the person who points out that everyone is participating in a lie. You feel challenged and deeply threatened by the fact that you yourself could have been so wrong about something. And Hollywood has created that, right? They've created this situation in which they have the only voice. They tell us who's dressed and who isn't dressed. And to have to face the fact that they might be wrong, that there might be other points of view out there, I just think it challenges them at such a deep level that they can't possibly let it stand.
And that goes, I think, mostly to two of the qualities that are really so prevalent in show business people. One of them is the desire to be loved and liked by pretty much everybody, that burning need for applause. And I think the other one is a sense that certainly many actors, and I guess many writers too, feel the need to be taken more seriously than perhaps they are. Being an actor is essentially has been historically considered a pretty frivolous kind of a thing. And when your entire job consists of pretending to be somebody else, it seems like a lot of these actors want to make a statement about themselves and what they personally feel about things. But the problem is they're in such an echo chamber that they don't get to hear anything other than the party line. And when you deviate from that party line, the smoke starts to come out of the ears.
Well, listen, in the 1500s, they wouldn't let actors in restaurants in polite society, right? I mean, the one thing I'll say...
And I think there's an awful lot to be said for that policy, by the way. No, I was just going to say, I think there's an awful lot to be said for that policy, and I think we could certainly give it a try. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
The one thing I would say in defense of our acting friends is that the main skill required to be a good actor is an outsized sense of empathy. You have to be able to sort of relate to a person in their struggles, and that's how you're able to sort of embody them on screen. I think that is a skill, but I think that there's, most people's great strengths and their fatal flaws are the same, and I think that's the case for actors. I think they spend so much time seeing themselves as empaths of human suffering that they always are going to respond against success. They're going to respond against what they perceive to be power. They're going to respond against what they see to be oppression, not in the healthy way that we should all oppose oppression, but in a sort of disproportionate way where anything that could cause someone to feel bad must be wrong, must be something that we need to oppose. That's the best argument I can make for them. The arguments from there get worse, which is actors, especially in Hollywood, very successful actors, live lives where they never hear the word no. No one ever challenges them. They make lots of money. People are always nice because they want to be close to them. They want some of that magic to rub off on them. They want to be seen in sort of the remnant of the light that shines on a celebrity. And the result is that you have these sort of debaucherous lifestyles. And so everyone wants to see themselves as a good person. What do you do when you want to be seen as a good person, but most of what you do with your personal life is you do in sort of rejection of classical morality? Well, you have to create a morality for yourself to be your moral calling card. And liberal politics, left-wing politics, give you just that opportunity. You don't have to be a good person. You're trying to save the whales. You don't have to be an honest person because you're trying to save the poor. You don't have to be a decent person at all. You're trying to save the entire world. I mean, what could be more moral or make you a better person than trying to save the actual world? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so what's funny is Hollywood has basically written a script, haven't they? They've written a script that everybody in Hollywood, writers, directors, actors especially, are supposed to recite. And the script, as you point out, is designed to show the rest of the country, those savages who weren't smart enough to get a job in show business, as Evan Sayet would say, that remind them of the intellectual, but most importantly, the moral superiority of their progressive betters in New York and Hollywood and so on. What's funny about this, Jeremy,
we may do drugs, we may sleep around, we may wreck our marriages, we may spend $12,000 on bottle service at parties at night, but we really care about the poor and we really care about the environment. We really am.
That's right. We don't actually do anything about it because God knows that would take time away from all of the debauchery. But we will raise awareness, and we will have a coexist bumper sticker on our car as we drive our Prius down the freeway. And frankly, if that's not going to stop war, then obviously nothing will. It's another rhetorical answer to a real world problem. What's funny about this, though, Jay, is that we talked about Matthew McConaughey and Bret Easton Ellis, and there's so many others who were demonized for basically supporting Trump. But one person who got just walloped by her own team during the election last year was Susan Sarandon. And Susan Sarandon didn't come out and say, I think Donald Trump's a swell guy or I'm going to give him a chance. Susan Sarandon basically came out and said, I think Hillary Clinton is corrupt. I'm going with Bernie Sanders. Give me the communist is essentially what she said. And she was forced to issue tweets and posts saying, I did not cost Hillary Clinton the election because I decided to give my vote to a guy who was even further to the left than she was.
Well, I would say that's
this is the problem with the victimhood mentality.
But that's happening a little bit on both sides of the aisle right now. We live in the most polarized moment, perhaps since the Civil War. You know, Donald Trump has a 90% or better approval rating among Republicans and a 10% or less favorability rating among Democrats. I mean, that's a remarkable divide. George Bush, Barack Obama, you know, they both had like 30% approval ratings from the other team at this point in their presidency. So I do think that there's sort of everybody's been forced to their corners a little bit right now. I don't know that I'd pin that completely on the left. It's very unfortunate that that's happening. You can't really engage in nuanced political conversation right now. What I will blame the left for is creating that environment, because by seizing sort of all the communicative powers of the country, as we've discussed, they created an environment where they could, you know, handle absolutely no heresy on their side, right? They can't even, you know, it's like they have this perfect orchestra, and if one instrument's out of tune, they think that it destroys the entire symphony. And so since they radicalized themselves so much and played out that radicalization in the presidency of Barack Obama, it sort of forced a radicalization on the right. And, you know, the consequences of that, I think, are being felt by all of us. So I'm not letting them off the hook. I do think they started it, so to speak. But I think that particular problem may now extend to everyone in the political conversation.
Well, they did start it, and I know it's been a signal honor of my life, and I know yours as well, that both of us have, I can barely even get this out of my mouth without just sitting here in amazement, but over time we both got to be pretty good friends with John Voight. And we both heard John Voight tell the story that this thing is not accidental. When John Voight burst on the scene with Midnight Cowboy, he was... he told us both in person, just I think pretty much just the three of us. John said that when he walked into this immediate success, he was immediately just mobbed by the left, and not in a bad way, but courted by them, absolutely seduced by them, courted by them. Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, all of them, explaining to him all of the plight of the troubled peoples in all the world, and so on and so on. And John Voight was basically an all-American guy, and he'd never heard any of this stuff before. And the reason that Tom Hayden and the rest of these far leftists wanted John Voight was he was so all-American. Like I said, it was a 6'4", right? He's this 6'4" blonde American guy playing a Texas guy from out in the sticks in New York, and people like Tom Hayden and the leaders of the progressive left saw the propaganda value, Jeremy, that's the only word for it, saw the propaganda value of a guy as all-American as John Voight, so they recruited him real hard to these left-wing causes. And when John Voight finally woke up, he said, I've got to atone for this somehow. So he's been an outspoken champion of freedom since then. But it's not an accident. They know what they're doing.
Of course they do. They're so much better at politics than people on the right are, because people on the right are busy living their lives and running the country. People on the left are in the business of shaping narratives. They're in the business of winning political contests. You know, it's one of the reasons that even when Republicans win political power, they're typically fairly clumsy at executing their policy agenda, because they're not good at government. It's why when Christians or conservatives do make movies, they quite often are not very good, because we're not actually natural storytellers. We're not in the business of creating narrative. We're playing at really competitive disadvantages in these two arenas, and the two arenas are really one. The arena of shaping the view that people hold of themselves and the world around them, and therefore what they'll be open to from a political point of view. So yeah, I think you're right. They're much better at it than we are. They're much more sophisticated about it than we are. It's not by accident. It is perhaps some of it natural that they would be better at this, since it is their actual business. I mean, what is a movie? A movie is you go into a dark theater where you're perfectly safe, you're air conditioned, you're well stocked with popcorn, you're sitting probably next to someone you either love or are hoping to love soon, and the lights go down and the flickering image starts up, and if something scary happens on the screen, by golly, you're scared. Now, what rational human could be afraid of a monster alien while sitting in one of the safest places on earth, a crowded room full of Americans? But that's the point. The point is Hollywood teaches us to fix our eyes on things that aren't, and then we feel very real reactions to those things, even though they're not. We feel fear, we feel sympathy, or we feel, we look at at a famous, well-paid actor playing the Dalai Lama or whatever, playing an ascetic, living a life of poverty, and we actually feel connected to his poverty. Well, he ain't poor, you know. Somebody's going to yell cut, and he's going to go back to his lavish lifestyle. So that, I mean, that's their business, and they're good at it. But they take those same skills and they apply it in the political sphere, and they convince us of things that are not, and then we respond in the real world to the fantasies of their narratives. By the way, we all do. Back to the point about healthcare, right? The Republicans, the people who are the elected Republican Senate, even they, knowing full well the dangers of Obamacare and of centralized healthcare markets, even they still are moved in the real world to respond to left-wing fictions. That's the power that they have.
Yep, and some of the people we've been talking about today, just as examples, Matthew McConaughey's the lash against him. Jimmy Kimmel was nice, said something relatively nice to Donald Trump. He's lambasted Susan Sarandon, all the rest. Every now and then, however, you run into somebody who, rather than stepping on a landmine, actually understands the consequences of what they are about to do when the facts catch up to their philosophy. And of all the examples of this, I don't think there's a better one than David Mamet, who I believe is without question the greatest living writer today in America. David Mamet was as liberal as they came. He basically inhabited all of the New York skyscrapers. He was a New York playwright, one of the most famous playwrights in the world, went to all the right parties, knew all the right people. And one day, David Mamet woke up and realized that what the left was saying just didn't make any sense. He wrote an article in the Village Voice, of all things, an extraordinarily liberal, progressive magazine in New York City. And David Mamet entitled that article, "Why I Am No Longer a Brain-Dead Liberal." Now, that in itself was a brave thing to do, Jeremy, but when we both heard that news, I think we both looked at each other and we just said, David Mamet, in the space of 15 minutes, lost 98% of all of the friends he's ever had in his life.
Yeah. You know, I had the privilege of being at the book release party for the book that he released not long after that article, sort of explaining his entire political conversion, and it was a bittersweet moment to see a guy at the peak of his powers coming over to our team is obviously a great thing, but to also see how much of his credibility, his cultural credibility, his industry credibility, he would be losing to do that. You know, that's one of the things people don't understand. Quite often in sort of my capacity at Friends of Abe, people will reach out to me and they'll say, wouldn't it be great if so-and-so actor or so-and-so actor showed up at this event or that event, at this rally or at this town hall, and leveraged a little bit of their celebrity the way that left-wing celebrities do. But what they don't understand is that, you know, and what Mamet did understand, because I think you're right, he went into this with his eyes open. You know, if George Clooney hosts Barack Obama, it's good for George Clooney and it's good for Barack Obama. If Clint Eastwood hosts Donald Trump, it's bad for Clint Eastwood and it's bad for Donald Trump. It's bad for Donald Trump because since the bench of celebrities who would support him is so thin, it always looks desperate when we bring celebrities out on the right.
That's right.
And it's bad for Clint Eastwood.
That's right.
Because the very thing that he's sharing with you, his cultural cachet, is diminished the instant that he shares it with you. So he's losing, you know, he's losing the very thing that you want every time that he leverages it on your behalf. That's, you know, what's the answer to that? The only answer is more conservatives becoming storytellers, more conservatives taking big risks, more conservatives putting story before message, becoming good storytellers and then letting the message follow that. You know, we see movies, we can all look at examples of films like Battle for Haditha or Redacted or something and say, well, the left doesn't even hide their biases. But that's true, but those aren't the films. Those aren't the greatest weapons that the left has. The greatest weapons that the left has are the far, far more subtle ways, the way that they create great art that just naturally pulls us away from things that we know in the real world to be true and get us lost in the lie of their fictional narrative. So, you know, we have to move into this space. It's a generational struggle. It's not something that's going to be solved by one billionaire or one Christian film company or any other thing. It's a, you know, it's a battlefield that we have completely ceded, and so it's going to take us a long time to take a piece of it.
Yeah, it's going to come from the ground up if it happens at all, from the grassroots up, and there's some indications that people out on the internet are not as liberal as some of the 20, 30 somethings who voted for Barack Obama and were ready to vote for Hillary Clinton. I've seen some stuff on the internet that was actually really quite remarkable in terms of that. Buddy, it's so good to talk to you. You ought to think about having a show of your own over there someday. You know,
well, it's
not
just
a bad
staying
idea.
up so late is the hardest part of being on TV. So, you know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
See if I can get myself geared up.
Well, it's good to see you, pal. You can catch Jeremy Boring and his writing over at dailywire.com and at Daily Wire. Take care, buddy. At Daily Wire, you can also see the Andrew Klavan Show, Ben Shapiro Show, and so on. They're great people. They're just down the street, and it's always a pleasure having you here to talk to us about the inside look on Hollywood. You know, the thing he was mentioning last about David Mamet was, I think, probably the most tragic thing about this and the most petty thing about it was not only did David Mamet lose pretty much all of his friends, he also lost his reputation. Once he came out with that article about no longer being a brain-dead liberal, the first thing that started to happen was New York critics started reviewing his plays much worse, and they would say things like, well, Mamet probably really peaked only 20 years ago. He hasn't really written anything good in 10 or 15 years. In other words, he used to be a good person, now he's insane, and he's not even a good artist anymore. These are the consequences for disagreeing with people whose entire philosophy is totalitarianism, and that's about what you'd expect, right? If you're going to be a totalitarian, that's what you do. You make sure everybody gets in line. We'll have more horrors and nightmares to talk about tomorrow right here on the Hot Mike Show. I'm Bill Whittle for NRA TV, and we will see you tomorrow.